Well, thank you, Ogle, for that very, very, very nice introduction. And sometimes it does still surprise me that I've worked in the same company for almost 27 years. I have to tell you guys, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, I was having dinner with my wife and my two daughters. And I told them, I said, hey, I'm going to give a talk at the University of North Carolina here in a couple of weeks. And before I could say anything else, my two daughters looked at me and said, Dad, really? My two daughters are engineering students at NC State. Yeah. And I said, wait a minute. I said, this is a really important conference. We're talking about solving global problems, big mankind issues, and I think I have a decent talk to give. And after a while, they said, okay, Dad, I guess that's all right. So here I am to talk to you today at the begrudging approval of my two daughters. Nature is absolutely fascinating, but over the last 100 years, mankind, as you well know, has placed a lot of pressure on nature, the very nature that we're going to need to sustain life on this planet. But I firmly believe that some of the very best answers to these problems is going to come from nature itself. Now, nature has produced a lot of amazing wonders, from the butterfly to the great white shark, but I want to tell you about one of my favorites, the redwood tree. Now, the redwood tree can live to be 2,000 years old. It can grow as high as 300 feet. It can start from a very small seed, but the amazing part to me is that in that tree can be as many as 2,000 tons of mass. 2,000 tons. And this is one of my favorite questions to ask my family members and neighbors. Where did all the mass come from? Where did the 2,000 tons come from? It came out of the air. It came out of the air. So how does it do that? Well, first of all, I'm sure some of you remember photosynthesis, but there's over 2,600 tons of CO2 that were taken in from the air and sequestered in over 725 tons of carbon in that tree. But how does something that big come from something so small? What happens there? Well, it comes from one of my other favorite wonders of nature. And I'm going to tell you about what that wonder does. But let me tell you this first. If you remember your high school biology, or if you're a biologist today, it comes from two simple molecules. It comes from water, and it comes from the CO2 that was absorbed. And what nature does is it splits the hydrogen away from the two hydrogens from the oxygen molecule in water and combines it with the CO2 to form carbohydrates. And that ability to form a carbohydrate and store the energy was the beginning of higher life form as we know it on the world. And about 3 billion years ago, nature created what I consider the wonder of the world. This thing. This is an enzyme. It's called photosystem 2. Now, a geek like me would hang that in my office as a modern artwork. But I wouldn't, because there's other enzymes that we have people working on, so they'd think I was playing favorites. But this, look at that. It's thousands of carbons. Why does nature create something so unbelievably complex to break apart a water molecule? And how does it do that? Well, without going into deep biology, it takes some photons through chlorophyll, and then through this incredible structure, it creates a very Zen-like atmosphere around that water molecule to allow that separation to happen without any pressure, without any heat, without any extra chemistry involved, and with no waste products. And it does that over and over again, very fast. And that ability to create molecules and break molecules in nature with that level of efficiency is an amazing thing that we can harness. So let me tell you about another enzyme. This right here is the superhero of CO2 capture. Absolutely the best capture device known to man. And it kept you from suffocating in your last couple of breaths. It's a carbonic anhydrase. It's in your bloodstream, and as you metabolize and exhaust CO2 from your body, it picks it up, transports it across the blood barrier membrane in your lungs, and allows you to exhaust CO2. And if that didn't happen, it wouldn't be good. And it does that millions of times per second. Again, no heat, no pressure, no extra chemistry, and incredibly fast with no waste products. So I can go all day about how cool enzymes are, but it's certainly not the point of this talk. Let me tell you where you find these. Where do they come from? Now listen, there's thousands of kinds of enzymes in nature. You have over 30,000 kinds in your body. But we have scientists who go to great lengths to find some very unusual types of enzymes that we can put to work. Now this is taken from an article about us that was published not long ago in the New York Times, and we're really proud of it, because it's not every day we end up in the New York Times. And it focused on doing laundry, and hence the polar bear here, because one of the critical enzymes involved in laundry is a cold water enzyme. And the American Cleaning Institute is talking a lot about the impact of cold water wash. But we have found unique microbes and enzymes all over the world, from salt lake beds in Africa to a famous Danish philosopher's grave in Copenhagen, to cold underwater fjords in Norway on these stalagmites that grow up from the bottom of the ocean. But some of the best ones have come literally out of the garden in the backyard. There's over 30,000 kinds of microbes in 1 gram of soil. And each one of those microbes can contain multiple types of enzymes that could do wondrous things in a man-made setting. So now that we know some areas where you can find these really cool enzymes and microbes, how do we unlock them? How do we unlock billions of years old secrets from nature? How does that happen? What can we use today? And I'm here to tell you that there has never been a situation like I've seen today from a technology perspective in biology. Nature has adapted over millions of years to multiple types of global conditions. We know that. We've had the Ice Age, we've had many, many periods of time, and nature has always adapted. But today, we're outpacing nature's ability to adapt. However, unlike no period in time, do I see a situation where today these tools from nature could actually help us to catch up and win this race that we have to save nature. And what's happening in the biology space, from the microbiome, the understanding of these unique colonies of organisms that live everywhere from the surface of your skin to the plant surface to the soil that I was mentioning earlier to inside your washing machine. We're just starting to understand that actually microorganisms work together. They have leaders, they have followers. It's unbelievable what's happening in the microbiome space. And then there's something you've probably all heard about, which is sequencing DNA and genomes in the human genome. And today you can do that so fast and for so little money. It's opening up tremendous amounts of understanding that we didn't have before. Now you can send your DNA off to 23andMe and find out why you drink lots of coffee and Scandinavian heritage and whatever it might be. But the point of this is that these technological understandings from gene editing to the microbiome and CRISPR techniques, et cetera, is happening at a faster pace than we've seen in the computing age. It's faster than Moore's law, meaning doubling computing power every 18 months. What's happening in biology is the fastest technology development mankind has ever seen. And what's really awesome about that is it unfolds millions of years of know-how from nature that we can utilize. I have to admit, I normally don't use notes when I talk, but I want to make sure I hold the time. So I failed to mention something that is out in the news every day, and this region here has a big capability in, which is big data. As you can imagine, 30,000 different microbes in 1 gram of soil. If you sequence all the DNA, and then you did that for a bucket of soil, that's a lot of data. And having big data capability to understand it is a key part of this. But as exotic and as fast as that technology is going, I want to tell you about how practically every day this technology can be put to use. And I'd like to start with, I don't know how many college students we have in here, but for sure there are t-shirts and jeans somewhere in the audience, and cotton textiles of all kinds. But what you may not realize is what it takes to turn cotton into a textile. It's actually a very, very resource-intensive process. It typically starts with this. This is a huge roll of cotton, white cotton, or before it's been bleached cotton roll. That's a ton of cotton material typically. But what you may not realize is what it goes through to become a dyed fabric with a certain feel. Oftentimes what was involved before the use of enzymes, which today is widely adopted, is it'll go through 13 different baths of high temperature, high pH, base chemicals, low temperature, cold water, acid chemicals, and water rinses in between, where you're affixing dye to the textile, and then you're removing some of the dye to give it a certain look. And it's very water, chemistry, temperature, and energy intensive. But if you add 4 or 5 different types of enzymes that do different things across that spectrum, you can reduce the amount of water, temperature, energy use dramatically. In fact, just through a handful of enzymes on a ton of cotton fabric, we can reduce the water usage for a ton by over 20,000 gallons of water. We can take the number of baths and rinses down by almost half. And we can eliminate the need for the equivalent of about 420 pounds of coal, if you think of it in energy terms. Now think about that, 420 pounds of energy contained in coal to process a ton of cotton fabric to make a textile. We can eliminate 147 pounds of chemicals, all by using about 12 pounds, 13 pounds of enzymes. That's the efficiency of nature used in practical terms. We can also use some special enzymes to give the fabric a certain condition of a t-shirt and make the t-shirt last a lot longer. So textiles last longer, we don't have to make as many. So, okay, so that's a little bit about clothing. So let's say now the clothing gets dirty and we need to wash it, and I alluded to this earlier. You probably haven't thought about this, but have you ever, the carbon cycle involved in doing 1 load of laundry when you wash your clothes. And we have in Novozymes some of the best life cycle assessment scientists in the world. Some of them have won awards for their full LCA work. And we looked at what does it take, carbon intensity, to wash clothes. All the way from the beginning of the extraction of the crude oil to make the surfactants that go into a box of laundry detergent, to the production of the detergent, to the packaging and then transport of the detergent to the retail store, to ultimately washing it in your house, and then the waste and recycling. And I know you can see this on the chart, but still, it just still blows my mind today that roughly 70% of the CO2 emission generation out of that whole process happens when you actually wash your clothes at home. and it's primarily due to the hot water or warm water that's involved. So, what can we do about that? That's where this polar bear comes in, which is we are now on our second generation of cold water enzymes. This is a huge breakthrough in my geek world of enzymes. The ability to wash your clothes at cold water with the exact same effects as you would have in hot water. Now, what could that mean? By the way, our latest enzyme on that is called Everest, hence the cold polar bear. And the American Cleaning Institute is talking a lot about this these days because of this impact. And so, in the United States, just from a practice perspective, roughly 17% of the wash is done in hot water, another third is done in warm water, and then the half of it roughly in cold. Every one of us has a chance to make a difference. If we all turn the dial down from hot to warm or from warm to cold by using laundry detergents that allow you to do that, we'd save 7.5 million tons of CO2 emissions across the United States. That's almost $1 billion in energy bills. And you can do that today. By the way, a teaspoon of enzymes in a box of laundry detergent allows you to reduce the amount of surfactant, the oil-based surfactant, by almost half. That's why you can see these concentrated high-efficiency laundry detergent solutions that you have today on the shelf. More example, and I'd like to talk about Wonder Bread. Now, for those of you who are in the room who, like I, can remember eating Wonder Bread, the kind, that sticks to the roof of your mouth when you eat the sandwich, that is not what I'm talking about. But this really cool superhero enzyme over here on the right has revolutionized the baking industry. And how did it do that? Well, when I was a kid, at that time, the way the baking industry worked is you baked bread at the bakery, you transported it to the grocery store. After about 3 or 4 days, it would start to get hard. And we would call the bread stale. And then it wouldn't sell. If it was a bagel, it only took, 12 hours, it seems like. And then what happens is the retailer or the supplier would come back, pick up the bread off the shelves, transport it to maybe a day-old bread store, and it would sit there and some of it would get sold, and then eventually they'd have to pick that up, and then they'd take what didn't sell to feed livestock, or maybe they would take that to a landfill. Well, what that enzyme on the right does is it clips one carbohydrate that's in bread dough, a long-chain carbohydrate that is actually responsible for what makes bread hard after a few days. And it goes in and it just clips that before the bread is baked, and now bread can last longer on the shelf than it will take for mold to grow on it. That revolutionized the baking industry. It literally took billions of gallons of transportation fuel out of the baking industry. Every time we use a gram, roughly, of enzyme in the baking industry, we save 10 loaves of bread, 10 plastic bags, and as I mentioned, a lot of transportation. If you take that out into kilo terms, every time we use a kilogram or 2 pounds of enzyme in the making of bread, we save 4,000 kilos of CO2 emissions. 4 tons of emission reduction for 1 kilo use of some of nature's coolest technology. So those are practical examples about how nature's biology makes a difference. Well, at Novozymes, we do generate about $2.2 billion of revenue every year, and the way we do that is through the sale of about 700 products. So you're lucky that I'm not going to tell you about all of those. But one of the things we do with our best life cycle assessment of scientists is we evaluate the impact of all of those products sold every year, and what does it mean for CO2 emissions. So from the enzymes that we use to feed animals, to the baking example that I gave you, to washing and other uses, That's 76 million tons of CO2 averted last year alone. That's like taking 32 million cars off the road. That's the power of biology. It's so efficient that every place we find a place to put it to use, the effects are dramatic. So we know it's going to take more than great fundamental research in the products we make, though, to get to where we need to get to as a human race and the planet. And so we have to think about this a little bit differently. And I'd like to introduce you to this guy right here. This is Klaus Stig Peterson. He's one of the Danes that you may have met while you were interning there in Novozymes. But he works in my team, and I'm really proud to say that I know this guy because he is a true visionary. This picture was taken from Times Square in New York from a few years ago, where he was named as one of the first 10 sustainability pioneers by Ban Ki-moon and the UN. And he was named one of those sustainability pioneers, not because, as he likes to describe himself as a retired hippie skateboarder who happened to get a PhD in chemical engineering, I think, and changed the world through sustainability. But he got that award because he was instrumental in not only helping the UN develop the Sustainable Development Goals, if you're familiar with those, but he was also more instrumental in the shift change that has happened there about how business can be brought to the table to make a serious difference in how we meet those goals. And there he is holding his likeness with his saying that he's known for, which is to let's make global goals local business. And he is really smart about how he does that. I have to tell you, he was texting me that night. I couldn't attend the event, but he was texting me these pictures that night. He can't believe it, my picture's up on the New York Times billboard. And he said, here's another one. There was more of them all the way down to the train station. But later in the evening, he sent me this. And he said, Adam, I'm at the dinner, the celebration dinner. And he said, I just went into the restroom, and above the toilet, my picture is on a plant. They've gone too far. But he's a great guy. And I appreciate his vision because he spurs Novozymes to think and do things differently. Speaking of the global goals. There we go. So, as I mentioned, the global goals are addressing many problems that we have known for a while. And from poverty to hunger to climate change and many other aspects. And the United Nations has been working as nation countries for a long time to try to solve those problems. But what the Sustainable Development Goals has done that I think is significant is that has really brought business to the table. 2 years ago, for the first time, they brought business to the high-level political forum and started to work on these problems. And we took that to heart as a company. So what do? We take the 17 global goals, the 169 targets, and we said there's 15 spots, impact categories, where Novozymes can make a serious difference. And then what did we do? Because it's not just good enough to know where the categories are. We said, we need to prioritize our portfolio. 1 of 4 people in our company works in R&D. And in innovation, we have a huge innovation pipeline. And we evaluate it for the normal things: risk, cost, investment. But we also analyze it for SDG impact. And those things that have the highest impact, that really stick out, we give them special emphasis. Very special approach to making sure that we not only do it ourselves, but we actually look for partners. We look for help from every place we can get it, from government to unique voices that are out there. So I can see my time is up, but I was delayed a little bit. I'll do my best to catch up. I'd like to give you another example of how we can think about this differently. So we said, let's look at it holistically. Every solution we can apply to some common areas. And in this case, we said, you know what? What if we took every solution we can apply to 1 acre of corn? Now, I grew up on a farm, and I know that's not corn rolled up in those bales, but an acre of corn as a baseline can feed 900 chickens. Let's just go with that. But there's the growing of the crops, there's the raising and feeding of the animals, and there's also the conversion of some of the starch into biofuels. So what if we took these unique microbiome soil inoculants we've discovered and used them to help grow the corn and reduce fertilizer usage? And what if we used some unique enzymes and fed it to the animals to reduce phosphorus inputs and improve feed efficiency conversion? And what if we use some really neat enzymes to not only improve the ethanol efficiency of the production, but extract more corn oil? And then for all the stalks and leaves and corn cobs left on the ground, let's take about 15% of that through another unique cocktail of enzymes and convert that into cellulosic ethanol. What would the effect be? And we started to study that, and they said, okay, now what if we did that on every acre of corn across the United States? If we did it, we could then feed as a baseline 9 billion chickens, but we would gain 2.3 million pounds of feed. We'd eliminate 120 million pounds of phosphorus, and phosphorus takes a lot of energy to mine. Most of it comes from Morocco. We'd gain 10 billion gallons of bioethanol. That's almost 7% of the nation's fuel supply. We'd generate some biodiesel from the corn oil I mentioned, and we generate 21 terawatts of bioelectricity from the lignin that's left over from the cellulosic ethanol process. And we'd avoid 87 million tons of CO2 emissions. So that's looking at biology in a more holistic way to solve these problems. So we know we have to think on a bigger scale. I'll touch this briefly. We know this also goes beyond our solutions and our technology, and we know we need others in the ring to accelerate. So we've started something called Hello Science. I invite you to visit it. It's targeted towards solving one of the SDG problems as a start. It's an open innovation forum that allows entrepreneurs, academics, students, NGOs, anybody who wants to come in there and participate. And it's going really well. We're also learning lessons about IT and a few other things in doing it. But the problem we started with was water, and we were inspired by UNICEF, who came into this forum and said, hey, you know, if you guys can work on a fast detection system for E. coli, it'll make a huge difference. 1,000 children a day die from waterborne illnesses, typically from an E. coli infection. So if we can get together and solve that problem, we'll make a serious difference. So we can all partner for impact in different and unique ways, and where we are in this region is very unique. When I think of biology, we are in, if not the hot spot of biology, one of the top ones. And the reason I say it is because of the diversity. We have universities working on plant science and big data. We have universities working on the human health of biology, animal health, molecular biology, and big data. Nowhere do I know that I visit do I see that level of diversity, and more importantly, that level of solution orientation towards the advancement of these wonderful tools from nature. So let me close by saying this. I know, as many of you know in this local community, science is incredibly important. Peer-reviewed, risk-analyzed, solution-oriented science. And while it's human nature, and I'm an engineer by background, to chase the latest technological silver bullet that's always evolving and out there in front of us, and we should pursue the future, we have to implement the solutions that we have today.